All right, welcome back, focused learners, to this explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the absolute most frustrating parts of standardized reading, trying to grasp the big picture. We've all been there, right? Staring at this dense, totally unfamiliar text, getting completely bogged down in the tiny details, and totally missing the actual point. Well, today, we're going to fix that.
Seriously, you know that feeling when you read an entire passage, get to the end and realize you absorbed absolutely nothing? Yeah, it's incredibly relatable and it definitely triggers that familiar reading anxiety. But let's completely reframe how we look at these texts. Think of this explainer as a detective's journey. We are going to crack the structural code of these passages together. You're no longer just reading blindly, you're hunting for specific, highly predictable clues.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering identifying the primary topic, the main point formula, the old idea versus new idea structure, mastering fiction and poetry, and finally, tracking the sequence of events. Let's see how we can transform wandering, subjective reading into an objective, formulaic process.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Identifying the Primary Topic.
To build a strong house, you really have to start at the foundation. And in reading comprehension, that means establishing that every single passage has a basic, identifiable structural fingerprint, which is the primary topic. The topic is simply the person, thing, or idea that is the main focus of the passage. Literally, it's just the word or phrase that pops up the most. And the best part? Because digital exam passages are pretty short, this topic is almost always introduced in the very first sentence, or at least right after it.
This brilliantly illustrates how a text just gives itself away right from the jump. Listen to this opening sentence. Admired primarily for her exquisite calligraphy, Otagaki Rengetsu was among Japan's most celebrated artists. Bam! The topic, Otagaki Rengetsu's art, is stated right up front. The text then goes on to talk about her pottery and ceramics, but nailing this topic immediately is crucial. Why? Because the correct answers to main idea questions will almost always refer back to it, which makes eliminating those tricky, off-topic trap answers a total breeze later on.
Moving right along to Section 2, the main point formula. Finding the topic is great, but it's really just step 1. Now we need to upgrade that basic topic into a main argument.
Here is your foolproof equation for reading comprehension. Topic plus so what equals the main point. You see, a main point isn't just some vague theme like oppression or social media. It's an actual argument. It tells us why the author thinks the topic is important or what main point they really want to drive home about it. If you can answer the question, so what, you've found your main point.
But, where exactly do we find this so what? Really strong readers know a little secret. They don't read every single word with equal intensity. Instead, they skim the middle and focus heavily on what I like to call blaring structural alarms. The beginning and the end of a passage are absolute prime real estate for big picture information, so heavily scrutinize those first and last sentences. Also, authors constantly signal their most important points using transition words, think however or therefore, and unusual punctuation, like dashes or colons. When you see those, your brain should be screaming, "Pay attention!"
This dark matter example perfectly models the formula in action. The topic is clearly dark matter, but what's the so what? Well, it's right there in the exact same sentence. It's invisible, but it must exist because its effects are visible. The author hands us both the topic and the central claim right at the beginning, and then uses the rest of the text just to explain how scientists actually arrived at that conclusion.
All right, Section 3, old idea versus new idea.
We're now going to introduce literally the single most powerful shortcut for deciphering science and social science passages. This is a total game changer. It's called the old idea versus new idea template. Basically, authors love to set up a traditionally accepted old idea early on. They'll use phrases like many people believe or traditionally it was believed. But then they pivot. They'll drop a powerful transition word, usually however or but, to reveal their actual main point. This is the new idea, which is often based on, say, recent evidence or a new study. And here is the secret sauce. That new idea is almost always the true point of the passage.
So the crucial takeaway here is that you should always jot down some super brief notes when you spot this structural shift. Let's say, for example, an old theory states the Clovis people were the first in North America. But then there's a pivot, and new evidence says people were actually there before the Clovis. By physically jotting down old equals Clovis first and new equals pre-Clovis, you're forcing your brain to process that shift. This ensures you don't accidentally fall for a trap answer that just summarizes the outdated theory.
Let's move to Section 4, Mastering Fiction and Poetry.
Now we need to take all these objective strategies and apply them to notoriously subjective genres.
This is where students usually overanalyze and get totally lost in the weeds. I need you to forget what you learned in English class about searching for deep, hidden symbolism. Seriously, toss it out. On standardized tests, you must stick to the literal text. For fiction, you're primarily looking for a specific trait or quality of a character or a place. For poetry, you're focusing strictly on literal events. We aren't interpreting, we're just condensing the information that is directly stated on the page.
Let's analyze this fiction snippet together. It starts off talking about the women in the family making ink and staying home, and then it ends with the great granny bragging, "Our studio is an ink palace." Honestly, just by paying attention to those beginning and end sentences, we get everything we need. We don't have to overthink the middle stuff about grain sheds and pits. The main idea here is literally just a summary. It's a description of a family's ink-making studio and their deep pride in it. That's it.
The exact same literal approach applies to poetry. Think about this excerpt. The speaker mentions they would love to write of the beautiful and brave, noting their winning ways. But then, a shift. They state they would not judge the beautiful by the beauty of their faces. Finding the main idea here just means leaning on those literal statements. The speaker clearly wants to study admirable people, but is completely uninterested in superficial external beauty. It's right there in black and white. No deep, mystical interpretation required at all.
Finally, Section 5, Tracking Sequence of Events.
For our final structural decryption, we're going to look at a macro-level view of how events and reactions string together in a text. You'll see this a lot in overall structure questions. When asked about structure, simply trace the physical actions right alongside the internal reactions chronologically. In this text about a guy named Gordon, we can track exactly what happens. Event 1, he arrives home. Event 2, he checks for a letter and finds none. Event 3, he feels disappointed, which the text describes as a stale feeling settling upon his breast. By breaking the passage down into this simple, chronological timeline, eliminating those overly complex or dramatic wrong answers becomes incredibly easy.
All right, let's wrap this up with the final verdict. We have just completed a real detective's journey today. We took what usually feels like a confusing, intimidating mess of details and turned it into a highly predictable, manageable set of clues. You now have the formulas. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you face a dense, unfamiliar passage, are you going to get lost in the weeds or are you going to hunt for the structure? Trust the objective formulas we explored today. Find the topic, ask so what. Look for the new idea, stick to the literal events, and never ever read a passage blindly again. Happy studying, focused learners, and we'll catch you next time.